Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This is your subject of cross-cultural psychology, and I'm your instructor, Sundar Subin. Uh, आज के लेक्चर में हम मेथोडोलॉजिकल इश्यूज ऑफ क्रॉस कल्चरल साइकोलॉजी को स्टडी करेंगे कि कौन कौन से ऐसे इश्यूज हमें ड्यूरिंग कंडक्टिंग रिसर्च इन डिफरेंट कल्चर्स हम इनकाउंटर करते हैं और हमें कौन कौन से प्रॉब्लम्स को फेस करना पड़ता है। मेथोडोलॉजिकल इश्यूज क्या होते हैं, इनकी सारी फर्दर डिटेल्स आप देखेंगे आज के लेक्चर में। ये हमारा ये जो लेक्चर है हमने इसको ये बहुत एक बड़ा टॉपिक है, इसलिए वी हैव डिवाइडेड इट इनटू डिफरेंट पार्ट्स। तो आज के लेक्चर के जितने भी हमारे सब लेक्चर्स होंगे, जितना भी हमने इनको पार्ट्स में डिवाइड किया, तमाम पार्ट्स में ओवरऑल मेथोडोलॉजिकल इश्यूज में आप सीखेंगे कि what is research methodology? Research methodology क्या होती है? What are the methodological issues that we encounter in cross-cultural research? Cross-cultural researches with methodological issues, amics and ethics approach, comparability and equivalence. These all are the issues that we have, and these all are very important topics that we should consider while conducting research across cultures. Because whenever we are conducting research into different cultures, it means that we are facing a totally different population as compared to our own in terms of language, in terms of beliefs, and in terms of all the other things. इसीलिए जब हम क्रॉस कल्चर रिसर्च कर रहे होते हैं, इट मीन्स whenever we are comparing two different populations with different beliefs, with different interests, with different practices, so we should be very careful in that. तो देख लेते हैं कि what is research methodology? A research methodology is the specific procedures or techniques used to identify, select, process, and analyze information about a topic. In a research paper, the methodology section allows the researcher to critically evaluate a study's overall validity and reliability. So, research methodology basically research methodology includes all the procedure of conducting a research. It includes selecting sample, selecting population, choosing what kind of sample do you need. It includes, first of all, identifying the desired population. Then it includes selection from that population, selecting methods of study, selecting methods of conducting the research, and identifying the desired population, selecting from that population, selecting methods of conducting the research. It also includes selecting the questionnaires or scales, selecting the scales or questionnaires, the methods of interaction, we can say the overall procedure of, or the overall process of selecting, the overall process of conducting the research. A research methodology or the process of methodology is very much important, that your whole research lies on that procedure. रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी की ही डिसाइड करता है आपकी मेथोडोलॉजी किस तरह की है, कि आपकी रिसर्च कितनी ज़्यादा वैलिड एंड रिलायबल होगी। देयरफॉर ये बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पॉर्टेंट है, आपकी सारी रिसर्च पे लाया करती है, दिस इज़ द कोर ऑफ योर रिसर्च। और इसीलिए हमें तमाम इश्यूज़ को केयरफुली कंसिडर करना होता है, और हमें इन तमाम इश्यूज़ को अपने साथ रखना होता है, और हमें एट ईच पॉइंट स्पेशली इन क्रॉस कल्चरल सेटिंग्स ध्यान रखना होता है कि कहीं पे हम इन तमाम इश्यूज़ को इनकाउंटर तो नहीं कर रहे। उसके अलावा why studying this concept is important? It is because many testing conditions and instruments are ecologically invalid. What does it means? इसका मतलब है कि many cross-cultural psychologists have recognized that test materials and conditions must simulate people's social environment if research conclusions are accurately reflect and generalized to the real psychology. जब भी आप कोई भी टेस्ट यूज़ करते हैं, व्हेनेवर यू आर यूजिंग एन इंस्ट्रूमेंट टू स्टडी, बिकॉज जब भी रिसर्च कंडक्ट की जाती है तो हमेशा कोई ना कोई टूल, कोई ना कोई स्केल यूज़ किया जाता है। फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर आप किसी भी कल्चर में डिप्रेशन मेजर करना चाहते हैं तो आप वहाँ पे डिप्रेशन का स्केल यूज़ करेंगे। आप वहाँ पे इंटेलिजेंस मेजर करना चाहते हैं तो इंटेलिजेंस के टूल्स, आप आईक्यू के लिए जो टूल्स होते हैं वो यूज़ करेंगे। आप उनके बिलीव्स चेक करना चाह रहे हैं तो आप उसके लिए वो स्केल यूज़ करेंगे। Now whenever you are using a scale, this is very important for you कि वो जो आप चीज़ें मेजर करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, they should simulate. Simulate का मतलब होता है कि similar होना चाहिए, या फिर उसको कि जिस तरह की actual situations उनकी होती हैं वैसा ही जो आपका स्केल है उन्हीं चीज़ों को एक्चुअली मेजर कर रहा हो। नाउ इफ इसके बहुत सिंपल एग्जांपल अगर आप ले लें कि एक पर्सन है, इलिटरेट है, हमारे किसी रूरल एरिया में रहता है, उसको आप एक ऑक्सफोर्ड लेवल का, या फिर आप उसको बहुत एक मास्टर्स लेवल का इंग्लिश में कोई भी स्केल दे देंगे फिल करने के लिए, तो डेफिनेटली जो उसका रिजल्ट्स होंगे आप उसको कभी भी अप्लाई नहीं कर सकेंगे। इसीलिए जब भी आपको कोई भी स्केल अप्लाई करना होता है इन क्रॉस कल्चरल रिसर्च, तो शुड मेक श्योर कि वो सामने वाला पर्सन उसकी लैंग्वेज को अंडरस्टैंड कर सकता है, उसमें लिखे हुए कॉन्सेप्ट्स को अंडरस्टैंड कर सकता है। बिकॉज बहुत से ऐसे कॉन्सेप्ट्स होते हैं जो अक्रॉस द कल्चर्स वेरी करते हैं। एक कॉन्सेप्ट उसके लिए आपका डिफरेंट मीनिंग हो सकता है, जबकि दूसरे कल्चर में उसी कॉन्सेप्ट का टोटली डिफरेंट मीनिंग हो सकता है। इसीलिए जब भी टेस्ट इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स यूज किए जाते हैं, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल मेक श्योर द अदर पर्सन अंडरस्टैंड्स द लैंग्वेज वेरी वेल। सेकेंडली, जो कॉन्सेप्ट्स आप डिस्कस कर रहे हैं, कॉन्सेप्ट्स का सेम मीनिंग है उस कल्चर में जो पूछा जा रहा है। अगर ये वाली कंडीशंस फुलफिल होती हैं तभी आप जो आपकी रिसर्च होगी, जो स्टडीज होंगी, उनको एक्यूरेटली जनरलाइज कर सकते हैं। एक्यूरेटली आप कह सकते हैं कि ये रिसर्च स्टडी उस पर्टिकुलर कल्चर को शो कर रही है। अदरवाइज उस कल्चर को, उसके जो रिजल्ट्स हैं वो अप्रोप्रिएटली शो नहीं करेंगे। डिस्पाइट द क्वेश्चंस, डेफिनेटली क्रॉस कल्चरल साइकोलॉजिस्ट बहुत लंबे अरसे से रिसर्चेस कर रहे हैं, बहुत लंबे अरसे से रिसर्चेस कर रहे हैं। दे हैव मेड ऑल द पॉसिबल, जितनी भी वो क्वेश्चंस कर सकते हैं। फिर भी बहुत से जो साइकोलॉजिस्ट हैं, डिस्पाइट ऑल द क्वेश्चन समटाइम्स इन रिसर्चेस, फिर भी इस तरह के स्केल्स, इस तरह के मटेरियल्स यूज़ हो जाते हैं जिसकी वजह से जो रिसर्चेस होती हैं वो उस पर्टिकुलर कल्चर को एक्यूरेटली डिस्क्राइब नहीं कर पाती। क्योंकि समटाइम्स स्टैंडर्डाइज टेस्ट यूज़ होते हैं, या फिर एक ऐसे टेस्ट जो एक कल्चर में डेवलप किए गए होते हैं उनको एज दे आर दूसरे कल्चर में अप्लाई कर दिया जाता है, उसकी वजह से भी डिफरेंट प्रॉब्लम्स होते हैं। फर्दर इस लेक्चर में मूव होने से पहले, डिफरेंट टॉपिक्स को स्टडी करने से पहले, डिफरेंट रिसर्चेस को देखने से पहले, विल मूव टुवर्ड्स अ वीडियो लेक्चर। आप उसको देखिए, अपने कॉन्सेप्ट्स को फर्दर क्लियर कीजिए, एंड देन विल कंटिन्यू आवर रेस्ट ऑफ द लेक्चर।
And understand the theoretical and methodological issues and challenges faced by cultural psychology. Culture is a fundamental yet often misused and misunderstood variable in understanding human behavior and interaction. It is very screen through which we see external reality and can be understood at a supra-individual level. Thus, it is tough for us to consider culture to see it, for we live in it and with it. The understanding of culture, both our own and another's, becomes obvious to us when we come face to face with some other culture. Sociologists, psychologists, anthropologists, cultural psychologists have been grappling with the concept of culture, the universe of concepts surrounding it and their implication on our behavior. Cross-cultural psychology, thus, could be seen as the study of similarities and differences in individual psychological and differences in individual psychological and social functioning in different cultures. It is a methodology for conducting research. It is a paradigm for scientific philosophy and greatly acquires an attitude of critical thinking, appeal for culture and childlike curiosity. However, this field is not devoid of issues and challenges. The various issues that we are grappling with are related to creating an operational definition of culture, resolving the issue of variability in cross-cultural data, erroneous analysis, ensuring validity and reliability of data across cultures, etc. In this module, we shall discuss the various theoretical and methodological issues in cross-cultural psychology. What is culture? In order to thoroughly understand the impact of and dynamics of cross-cultural psychology, we need to first understand about culture. All psychological researches occur in particular cultural context. Culture is the screen through which we view world. However, we haven't yet been able to ascertain how culture influences psychological processes and how much of these processes are generalizable across cultures. Culture, however, is not synonymous with race or nationality. We can view culture in two senses. First, we may say that culture resides within an individual, thus relating it to all the psychological processes related to the person. Second, we may say that culture resides outside a person, thus making him subject to experimental manipulation. Status of culture in psychology. Ebbinghaus has given us the golden words. Psychology has a long past, yet its real history is short. Along this line, could the origins of cross-cultural psychology be traced? From time immemorial, writers have been writing about culture and cultural relationships. Even before modern psychology began taking interest in this field, the origins of cross-cultural psychology could be traced to ancient Roman and Greek times. W.H.R. Rivers conducted a study where he found out the tendency of people to denigrate the culture of others and promote their own cultures. A tendency called ethnocentrism. Examples of ethnocentrism could be seen long back in ancient Greece also, where we find reports that Herodotus would look down upon people who did not speak Greek or did not live in Greece. Psychology, in simplest terms, could be defined as the study of similarities and differences in individual psychological and social functioning in various cultures and ethnic groups. Cross-cultural psychologists initially tried to seek general, universal principles which would apply across cultures. Thus, cross-cultural psychology traditionally involved testing of Western concepts in various different cultural settings. And the driving notion was that culture was independent of the individual and could be separated from different psychological principles and actions. The modus operandi of cross-cultural psychologists was to collect data across multiple cultural settings and compare and contrast the effects in order to produce knowledge about phenomena which are deemed to be universal and which are deemed to be culture specific. And an attempt was made to determine how different cultures influence people's behavior. Most of the cross-cultural psychological research has been conducted using the research methods of Western mainstream psychology, although
this is also the major problem because अगर हम एशियन कल्चर्स की बात करें तो एशियन कल्चर्स बहुत ज़्यादा वेरी करते हैं. there are lots of dissimilarities between the both cultures. जब हम वो methods use करते हैं सारे western mainstream psychology के, तो sometimes we cannot apply them or generalize them on our cultures as they are generalized in the western cultures.
this method allows universality and generalizability. It also gave cross-cultural approach criticism on many areas. For example, studies have at times used research tools such as tests, apparatus that are unfamiliar or ecologically invalid for people of some cultural setup, which made the result and comparisons completely meaningless.
You will all see the ecological invalidity experiments after this video lecture.
For example, our assumptions regarding individualistic and collectivistic nature of culture influences attributions for the observed differences in the kinds of culture under observation. Our assumption may go wrong in two crucial ways. First, the assumptions of individualism and collectivism. If not measured in individual research participants, may be wrongful. And second, if we rely on differences on just one single cultural dimension, we might overlook more precise explanations. Malpass summarized the fundamental problem of cultural comparisons in this way. No matter what attribute of culture the investigator prefers to focus upon or to interpret as the causative variable, any other variable correlated with the alleged causative variable could potentially serve an alternative explanation of a mean difference between two or more local populations. We need to explore and understand the various underlying psychological mechanisms in order to understand the role of multiple variables in cross-cultural research. Concept of cross-cultural research. Cross-cultural research is the systematic and scientific research in which we compare two cultures. The goal of the systematic comparison is to yield the occurrence, spread, and etiology of cultural dispersion across larger sphere, usually worldwide.
So, what is the goal? First of all, cross-cultural research is a systematic and scientific method that compare the two different cultures. And what is the reason and what is the purpose and the goal of this systematic comparison is to tell the people, is to tell the different societies, and it's to tell the world कि किस तरह से कल्चरल डिस्पर्शन होती है, किस तरह से दो कल्चर एक दूसरे से वेरी करते हैं, उन कल्चरल वेरिएशंस की और कल्चरल डिसिमिलैरिटीज की रीजंस क्या होती हैं. एटियोलॉजी की जब हम बात करते हैं तो हम
few concerns that are investigated in research include a prototype of consistency and basis of consistency in the practices, beliefs and social role, norms within the organizations, human communities and other form of groups. B. impact of history, language, and identity on the consistency of a psychological phenomenon, and C. Reasons for conflicts, cleavages across communities. The idea of the whole research is to explore and accept uniqueness of each culture too. The idea is not to impose generalization of an attribute observed in one culture to other, as in mainstream psychology, but to identify the general and unique behaviors and psychological attributes at the same time. Besides, the cross-cultural research attempts to reach a reliable explanation through receiving the primary data from the two cultures. Rather, the cross-cultural research rejects the secondary data received from the surveys of crime rate, gross national product, and so on. The evolution of cross-cultural research began in the late 19th century by Edward P. Taylor. Form of cross-cultural analysis with his statistical methodology. Since then, many researchers like Summers, Mudrock, Diver, and a few names contributed in the cross-cultural research. Murdoch combined statistical methods with ethnographic research, while Diver gave ethnographic atlas to study the cultural traits as a unit of analysis in cross-cultural research. Thus, cross-cultural research is the recent sub-discipline in cross-cultural psychology. Before we engage further into the methodological issues of cross-cultural research, it is imperative that one should scrutinize the theoretical issues in cross-cultural research. Theoretical issues in cross-cultural research. Here, we try to identify the theoretical challenges and issues faced by cross-cultural psychologists. Theoretical issues in cross-cultural psychology endeavors to uncover the issues of describing and explaining the behaviors across cultures. The theoretical issue demands to explore the challenges that researchers in cross-cultural studies encounter while operationally defining the cultural factors and construing the cultural phenomena in a systematic way without losing the significant data from the cultures. In this section, we shall look at certain disadvantageous theories and methods harmful to the field and its growth. We shall see how such theories overlook important concepts in psychology, improperly define and measure cultural factors, produce faulty and erroneous conclusions, etc. Flawed theoretical approach in construing culture. Ratner and Huey pointed out flaws that theories in the discipline of psychology had permeated around the construction of culture. Its relationships to biology and psychology. They pointed out that psychology in its evolution as a subject matter had ignored sufficiently defined the cultural factors within psychological phenomena. As a consequence, the observations and findings had been confounded with errors that demonstrate the false relationships between the variables. That is especially true in studies conducted in cross-cultural research. In conceptualization of culture, Ratner and Huey observed that researchers in psychology had taken two approaches in formulating the ideas of culture. First approach, by mainstream psychologists, it views culture as a mismatch of various factors which are all connected to a psychological phenomena. A systematic representation where biological and cultural factors are connected by arrows to psychological phenomena is usually presented. The emphasis on this understands individual behavior across cultures by taking into account both cultural and biological features of our species. This approach formulates culture as one of the factors, like other factors, in affecting psychological phenomena. They highlight features of the cultures like ecological context, ideological and socio-political contexts as features that account for the psychological phenomena in the culture. They try to integrate them and unify them under one single approach. The drawback of this method is that there is not systematic, coherent integration between the diverse factors. Also, the roles of these factors are not clearly elucidated. Cross-cultural psychology espouses an eclectic approach to explain culture. Although adopting an eclectic approach is important in this field and is a particularly important feature of this field, it also leaves us without and principles or directions and forces us to accept any erroneous thinking and judgment under the mask of tolerance. While taking an eclectic approach, many factors have been accounted, but they are presented in a fragmented form. Few cross-cultural psychologists integrate the biological dispositions and cross-cultural factors while explaining psychological phenomena. Indeed, most theorists gave privilege to the biological disposition over cultural factors. Matsumoto minimizes the role of cultural variability and maximizes the role of biological dimension in explaining behavior. Typically, this kind of approach indirectly disregards the role of culture. For instance, the study on expression of emotions are using techniques of facial affect. For instance, the studies on expression of emotions are using techniques of facial affect recognitions that seem to facial affect recognition program that is innate and universal, and B, culture-specific decoding rules that intensify, de-intensify, mask or qualify the perception. As observed, culture had been reduced to be a moderating variable in context of any experiment. Thus, though the role of culture had been acknowledged but at the same time relegated, they had shown to be a moderating variable that refines the nature of psychological process in study of a psychological experiment. This is why cross-cultural research is normally not very different from so-called mainstream and essentially experimental and reductionist research. Thus, it is a theoretical demand on the researchers in cross-cultural studies to scrutinize the role of cultures in impacting the psychological phenomena, lacking consideration on cultural factors to describe psychological discrepancies among groups. Aforementioned, it seems to be a matter of theoretical concern that true cultural factors are not attended, while describing difference in psychological attributes amongst cultural groups. Generally, cross-cultural research takes culture as an external element. With this kind of stance, there is a huge possibility that variety of errors can infiltrate in explaining true psychological behavior. For instance, wrong faulty logics can be used for attributing the differences in the groups. At times, in such cases, even the false cultural bias is determined to explain discrepancy in psychological attributes. For example, the process of recall as a cognitive process is largely deducted to be repercussion of nature of recall in context or without context in librarian and American cultures respectively. Such kinds of stance on culture are generalized in describing other cognitive processes also between cultures. Cross-cultural research seems a very explicit view of culture is taken. As a result, a very superficial view of culture as factor is taken. If taken at all to describe true psychological behavior, this had been a major theoretical concern in cross-cultural psychology. cultural factors may be misinterpreted or misunderstood. To describe cultural factors as variable in interpreting psychological difference, array of errors can be occurred. Few of them are mentioned as below. Inaccurate logic was ascertained to describe the influence of cultural factors on psychological behaviors. Suppose, if we compare two cultures and find variations between two cultures on a particular ground, A, we may attribute all the psychological differences observed between two cultures on the single ground, A as located in earlier discourse. This kind of generalization is misinterpreted on the basis of inaccurate logic. These forms of inaccurate logic are especially observed while describing cultural factors on psychological constructs in cross-cultural psychology. As a result, many other cultural factors are either ignored or misunderstood. To illustrate an example, China and America are countries that are different on many cultural grounds, like political system, education, wealth, social values, like individualism and collectivism. If we choose social value as the only ground and attribute all psychological differences on the basis of social value identified, this leads to misconstruction and misidentity of true cultural factors that is presumed on faulty logic. These errors are alarming and may lead to erroneous findings in cross-cultural studies. Nature of cultural data in explaining behavior of individual. An ongoing debate that pivots around the construction of culture is about the nature of data that describes the cultural phenomena. The two arguments stand between cultural phenomena described as a tangible concept observed within the specific social system versus the culture as a theoretical and intangible construct observed through a set of core variables. Lohner and Adamopoulos suggested that cross-cultural psychologists describe cultural factors as an intangible construct that can be theoretically described. They seem to extract variables that give summarized view of the cultural factors which reflect a distinct social system. As a result, the process of abstraction is followed that leads to minimization and quantification of the information. This abstraction helps in handling the heavy quality of data to few sets of core variables that explain cultural variations. This process facilitates in cross-cultural comparisons. The nature of abstraction leads to following limitations. A. Since the data is minimized, the description may lead to losing of some relevant data. B. Reducing culture to core set of variables can also make behavior incomprehensible per se. C. The concrete quality of the culture is ignored. At times, certain behavior and emotion are so indigenous that they can't be compared to emotion in other culture. Example, an emotion of lajja is so indigenous that reducing to core set of variables may lead to losing of the tangible quality of this emotion. Summary. In this module, we learnt about culture is a unique meaning and information system shared by a group and transmitted across generations that allow the group to meet basic needs of survival by coordinating social behavior to achieve a viable existence, to transmit successful social behaviors, to pursue happiness and well-being, and to derive meaning from life, according to David Matsumoto. Cross-cultural psychology, in simplest terms, could be defined as a study of similarities and differences in individual, psychological, and social functioning in various cultures and ethnic groups, according to Katsubasi and Berry. Theoretical problems in cross-cultural psychology involve faulty understanding of the interplay between biological and cross-cultural factors, misidentifying or misconstructing explanatory cultural factors, presuming the impact of cultural factors on psychological phenomena on the basis of faulty logic, etc. Methodological problems in cross-cultural psychology involve using ecologically invalid testing conditions, ambiguous scale items, exaggerating small quantitative differences to prove a vast qualitative difference. The present discussions will overview the theoretical errors that had misrepresented the operational definitions of the variables. The discussion will also put across certain solutions for researchers to
will discuss the ecological invalidity of the instruments in the light of experiment, जिसको अभी हम अपने next part में go through करेंगे.